Welcome back to Adaptive Humans. I'm your host, Jami de Lou. Around here, we return to three anchors: how we navigate our emotions, how we adapt across differences, and how we steady ourselves when stress or triggers show up. Because that's what helps us stay human when life gets real. This is episode 2 of season 2. In the last episode, we talked about beginning again, about recalibration, about the differences between feeling stuck and actually being in the process of reorienting. I said something that a lot of people responded to. If beginning again feels harder than you expected, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means your operating system is doing its job. And what I heard back in messages, in sessions with leaders, and in the quiet conversations that people have after meetings was some version of, if my operating system is recalibrating, what exactly is it processing? And that's what today's episode is about. Because beneath the visible demands of your role, the meetings, the decisions, the deadlines, the deliverables, there's a layer of weight that most organizations have no language for. It doesn't show up on an agenda. It rarely makes it into a performance review. It almost never gets discussed in a leadership team meeting. But it's shaping everything: how decisions get made, how conflicts show up, how collaboration holds or fractures under pressure. It's because of the invisible load. We often hear about the invisible load for women, for those who are caregivers. But the invisible load can impact everyone, even if it's heightened, and particularly for women and primary caregivers. And today I want to name it clearly, not as a feeling, not as a wellness concern, as a behavioral force that is directly shaping leadership, performance, and the health of the systems you are a part of. In professional settings, people are not just carrying personal aspects of the invisible load. They're also experiencing the professional invisible load. And these demands have grown almost as fast as AI technology. This conversation matters right now because we're months into a year where the pressure hasn't eased. For many, it's actually intensified. And the gap between what people are carrying and what their systems acknowledge is growing wider. If you're leading right now, whether that's leading a team, a family, a classroom, or yourself, and you can feel that something is taking more from you than it used to, this episode is for you. Beyond the bio. Beyond the bio is where we go beneath titles, roles, and what things look like on the surface to what's actually shaping how people show up. And here's what I'm noticing across the leaders, caregivers, professionals, and humans I work with and talk to. People aren't struggling because they lack talent. They're not struggling because they lack motivation. They're not even struggling because the work itself has gotten harder, although for many it has. They're struggling because the load they're carrying has no place to land. Let me explain what I mean. There's the visible load. That's the work people can see and name. The project with the deadline, the board meeting to prepare for, the hire that needs to happen, the team that's underperforming. That visible load is real. It's heavy, and most organizations are at least aware that it exists, even if they don't manage it well. And then there's the invisible load. The invisible load is the accumulation of forces that shape our capacity before we even open our laptops. It's compounding change. Not one reorganization, but the third in 2 years. Not one leadership shift, but a pattern of instability that has trained your nervous system to stay in a braced kind of mode or capacity. It's the cultural weight, the cognitive and emotional tax of navigating spaces where your identity, maybe it's your race, your gender, your accent, your family structure, your immigration status, your sexual orientation, It adds layers of calculation to every interaction. Who's safe? What can be said? What will be misread? That is not paranoia. That is pattern recognition earned through experience. It's also caregiving demands. The parent whose memory is changing, the child's whose needs don't pause because it's quarter end, the partner whose health is shifting, the sibling you're coordinating care for across state lines or maybe even globally between countries. Caregiving doesn't clock in and out. It runs in the background of every meeting, every commute, every attempt to focus. Sometimes work actually can serve as a distraction, but it doesn't mean that those caregiving needs and that invisible load isn't sitting as a layer under the surface. It can be identity fatigue, the exhaustion of being the only one, the first, the one expected to represent, translate, or absorb discomfort on behalf of others. The fatigue of watching your community be debated as a political issue while you're expected to perform as a neutral professional while feeling the impacts of everything that's happening. And for many people, it's the job loss that turned into an unprecedented time lag in finding a new role, navigating the application processes that don't amount to engagement despite your strong efforts to network. And it's the rapid pace of technology change, the feelings that the tools, expectations, and competitive landscape are shifting faster than any human can actually metabolize. AI isn't just changing workflows. For a lot of people, it's changing their sense of relevance, stability, and professional identity. And that uncertainty doesn't stay neatly contained. It bleeds into confidence, decision making, and creative capacity. Fear and creativity don't work in coexistence together. They're actually in conflict of each other. Each of these forces on its own is significant, but invisible load is not about any one single stressor. Invisible load is what happens when these forces compound. It's the caregiver who's also navigating a reorg. It's the first generation leader carrying cultural weight who's also watching their industry get restructured by AI. It's the working parent absorbing their team's anxiety while managing their own health issues while trying to figure out what's happening with their kid at school. Nobody is carrying just one of these things. And that's what makes it invisible. Each individual force might feel manageable in isolation, but they don't arrive in isolation. They stack, they interact, and the compound effect is what actually determines your capacity on any given day. And this is important. The compounding is not just additive, it's multiplicative. When you're already carrying caregiver stress, the reorg doesn't just add another item to the list. It multiplies the cognitive demand of everything you are already holding. Because now your nervous system has to process the caregiving and the instability and the question of whether your role is safe and the implications to your family if it isn't. Each new force amplifies the ones that already are there. This is why people say things like, I used to be able to handle this. And they're right. They could. When the load was simpler, when there was space between demands, and when the world felt more predictable. The fact that they can't handle it the same way now is not evidence of decline. It's evidence of an accumulation that's occurring. Now, here's what matters about the invisible load. It doesn't show up in ways we've been trained to recognize. When invisible load is high, what organizations typically see is slower decisions, more conflict, missed connections, reduced creativity, and people who look checked out. And what organizations typically label it as is a performance problem, a motivational issue, a culture problem, or a talent gap. But it's not a talent gap. It's a capacity gap. I'll say that one more time. It's not a talent gap. It's a capacity gap in most instances. The talent hasn't changed. The capacity to deploy that talent has. And the difference between those two things is everything. I want to be specific about how this shows up because I think specificity is what makes the invisible visible. I work with leadership teams. I'm someone that can come in embedded in their meetings, their strategy sessions, conflict conversations. And what I see again and again is a leader who used to make decisions with clarity is now circling. Not because the decision is harder, but because their capacity to hold the complexity has been consumed by what they're carrying outside of the room, along with the stressors that are occurring inside the room. A team that used to navigate disagreement productively is now either avoiding it entirely or escalating it faster than situations warrant. And not because they've forgotten how to collaborate, because their nervous systems are running on thinner reserves. A senior leader who's performing at a high level publicly is quietly considering leaving, not because of the work, because of the accumulation, the weight of holding everything together while the systems around them don't acknowledge what that costs. These are not edge cases. This is a pattern. And I want to name something here that I think matters for this season and for this moment in the world. The invisible load is not equally distributed. Everyone is carrying something, that's true. But the cultural weight, the identity fatigue, the caregiver demands, and the fear, the real physical somatic fear that comes with navigating systems that were not designed with your life in mind, that load is heavier for some than it is for others. And pretending that it's evenly spread doesn't make leadership clearer. It makes it less honest. For professionals who spent their careers making organizations more accessible and inclusive, the invisible load right now includes watching their life's work be reframed as a liability. Many of their roles have been lost. Some have been targeted by websites designed to expose and endanger them, to target them and put them at risk. Some have endured threats to their safety, including death threats, for work they did in good faith in service of the belief that every person should be able to say, this place, this organization was created with me in mind. And I think people mean well when they say, oh, we'll just call it something different for now, because we know that things like diversity, equity, and inclusion and DEI have been weaponized. But the framing, while intended to help, can minimize what's actually being lost. This isn't a rebrand. For many people, it's a professional and personal rupture that is still unfolding. And it's a very real invisible load that shapes how people show up, lead, and make decisions, whether anyone sees it or not. And I also want to be clear, this episode is not about ranking pain. It's just about naming the behavioral realities happening. When humans carry more than their systems acknowledge, performance suffers. Trust erodes, decision-making degrades, and the people with the highest load often leave first, taking institutional knowledge, their cultural intelligence, their relational depth, their ability to drive what draws people into the organization. It's not a personal failing. That's a systems outcome. And that's what Beyond the Bio is today. The things that never make it onto the agenda are often the things that are determining whether the agenda gets executed and how it gets executed. Brave enough moment. This brings us to our brave enough moment. Being brave enough isn't about dramatic moves. It's about the courage to tell the truth in a room that hasn't asked for it. And when it comes to the invisible load, the brave thing is not just naming that it exists. The brave enough thing is admitting what it's costing us. Most leaders I work with can describe their invisible load. when you give them permission to do so. They can tell you about the parent with dementia, the divorce they're navigating, the fear for their kid, the health issue they haven't told their team about, the financial stress that nobody sees because their title looks really impressive. They know what they're carrying. What they haven't done, what most of us haven't done, is trace that line between the weight and what's shifting and how we lead. Let me give you 3 examples of what I mean. These are composites, examples, real patterns drawn from real people, but no one person's specific story. The first is the leader who's lost their edge on making decisions. She used to be a person in the room who could synthesize complexity and move the group forward. And now she's sort of hedging, asking for one more round of data, deferring to the group when she used to lead the call. Her team reads this as uncertainty. Her boss reads it as a confidence issue. And what's actually happening is she's making decisions at work while simultaneously managing her mother's transition to a memory care facility. Her decision-making bandwidth is not lower because she's less capable. It's lower because her cognitive load is split in 2 systems that both demand executive function, and neither one pauses for the other. The second is a leader who's running hot in meetings. He's sharper than usual, more reactive. His team has started tiptoeing around him. HR is getting whispers about tone, while what's actually happening is he's married to a first-generation American and watching immigration enforcement escalate in his community while leading a team where nobody knows this about his life. His nervous system is in a sustained threat response. The reactivity in meetings isn't a personality problem. It's his nervous system has been scanning for danger for months and doesn't have the capacity to downshift just because the calendar says it's time for a strategy review. The third is a leader who seems fine, but is quietly disengaged. They hit their numbers. They're professional. They're present in every meeting. But their creative risk-taking that used to define their leadership has gone quiet. They're managing, not leading. What's actually happening is they've been carrying the emotional weight of their team going through 2 rounds of layoffs while absorbing their team's anxiety while processing their own lived experience with all of this. They're not disengaged, they're depleted. The energy that used to go towards innovation is now going towards stability. And nobody's even asked them what that shift has cost. These are not stories about people who need a wellness program. These are stories about behavioral forces reshaping how capable leaders operate. And I want to pause on that distinction because I think it's the most important thing I'll say today. When organizations see these matters, the instinct is almost always to individualize the problem. Send the leader to coaching, offer an EAP referral, suggest a wellness day, create a resilience workshop. And none of those things are bad. Some of those genuinely help. I've implemented many of those in organizations. But they all have the same underlying assumptions. The problem is the person. If we can just help the individual become more resilient, more regulated, more balanced, the system will work. What if the system is the variable? What if the reason the leader can't make decisions isn't that she needs a coaching engagement, but the organization has restructured 3 times in 2 years and never paused to acknowledge the cumulative toll of the instability on the people inside of it? What if the reason the team is in conflict isn't that they need a communication workshop, but that they're operating inside of a culture that rewards speed over clarity and treats questions as resistance? What if the reason people are quietly leaving isn't a compensation problem, but a humanity problem? A system that takes the full capacity of the human but only acknowledges the visible outputs. I'm not saying individual support doesn't matter. It absolutely does. I've needed it myself. And I'm an executive coach. I believe in the power of one on one work. It is transformative. But coaching someone to be more resilient inside a system that keeps depleting them is not a long term solution. It's a coping mechanism. And there is a difference. The brave thing is not pretending the weight isn't there. The brave enough moment is being honest about how it's changing what you do. Now, I also want to talk about what brave enough looks like on the other side, not just the person carrying the load, but for the person in the position who's seeing it occur. Because invisible load stays invisible partly because people are carrying it silently. But it also stays invisible because people around them aren't asking the right questions. So if you manage people, lead a team, or hold any kind of position of authority, asking what's making this harder right now instead of why isn't this done is a way of noticing a behavior change and getting curious about it before labeling it. Designing a meeting that accounts for the fact that people in the room are carrying things you can't see. Advocating for realistic timelines instead of absorbing unrealistic ones on behalf of your team. And naming your own visible load, even partially, so that the people around you know it's safe to be honest. None of these require dramatic organizational overhauls. It requires a shift in attention. It's a matter of going from what's wrong with this performance to what's shaping the capacity behind the performance. That shift is brave because it means admitting that the system you're leading might not be seeing the full picture. And for a lot of leaders, that's uncomfortable. But it's also the only shift that actually changes what happens next. Because you cannot improve what you refuse to see. Being brave enough today doesn't mean having the answers to the invisible load. It means being willing to name it in yourself first, and then when you're ready, in the rooms that you lead. Naming doesn't fix it, but naming is what makes it possible to address. And that's enough for right now. The Just Be reset. Before we close, let's take a Just Be reset. This is where we practice, not in theory, but in reality of what it is to care for ourselves and our nervous systems. We've spent this episode naming things that are heavy. That naming has a cost. Your body may have responded to some of what was discussed by tightening, maybe a recognition of an emotion that you didn't realize you were experiencing. That's normal. That's your system telling you it heard something that was true for you. So before I give you something to think about, I want to give you something to help release and process what you've been navigating through this episode. So we'll start with a body reset, and then we'll go into a leadership reflection. First, the body. If it's safe for you to do so, I'd like you to pause. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. If your legs are crossed, uncross them. And feel both feet on the ground. Take in a deep breath for 4 seconds. And then I want you to let it out for the count of 8. Now, without trying to fix anything, ask your body one question. Where am I holding what I haven't named? It might be in your chest, your stomach, maybe it's in your neck, the tightness behind your eyes. You don't need to do anything with the answer. Just notice it. Your body has been carrying this, whether you notice it or not. So noticing it is a form of respect. Let's do another set of breathing. Take one more breath in for 4 and let it out for 8. Now let's move into a leadership reflection. I'll give you a second. If you're driving, obviously you can think about this and maybe come back to it later, or you're out for a walk while listening to the pod. But when you have a second, I want to give you a few questions for you to reflect on. These are what I call an invisible load inventory. It's not a worksheet, it's just 3 questions to sit with this week. If you journal, you can use a journal. If not, a notepad, something just for you to reflect on. Either way, hopefully some of your responses and thinking about these questions might help start shifting your attention. Question 1. What am I carrying right now that doesn't have a place to land? Not what's on your task list. It's what's underneath it. Whether it's fear, grief, caregiving, the uncertainty, the cultural weight, the identity fatigue. What's consuming or what things are consuming your capacity that has no line item, no meaning, or no acknowledgement. It's just occurring. Question 2. How is that showing up in how I lead, decide, or relate? This is the honest one. Not how you wish you were showing up, how you actually are. Are you avoiding decisions, moving faster than a situation warrants, withdrawing from collaboration, absorbing other people's tension without naming it? This isn't about judgment, it's about awareness, because awareness is where the shift starts. Question 3. What is one thing I need that I haven't asked for? This could be space, time, a conversation, a boundary, permission to go just even a little bit slower. Support that's concrete, not symbolic. One thing, not a whole new way, not a whole new system, just one honest need that you've been working around instead of naming. That's your invisible load inventory. 3 questions. I'll put them in the show notes. You don't need to answer them all right now, but I'd encourage you to come back to them before the week is out. And if you lead others, here's a challenge. Pick one person on your team this week, someone whose behavior has shifted in a way that you've noticed but haven't named. And instead of evaluating the behavior, get curious about what might be underneath it. You don't need to ask them about their personal life. You don't need to become their therapist. You just need to ask a better question than what's the status of X. Try maybe instead, how are you doing with everything you're holding right now? Or is there anything making this harder that I should know about? Or simply, what do you need from me this week that I haven't thought to offer? That's not soft. That's leadership that sees the full picture. Here's what we've named today. Invisible load is real. It's compounding change, cultural weight, caregiving demands, identity fatigue, and the pace of technology, all running underneath the visible loads, while simultaneously also running in parallel with whatever invisible loads are occurring within the organization that you might be working in. Layoffs, reorgs, change, chronic change, change fatigue, right? You are not failing. This is a behavioral force, and it's shaping decisions, collaboration, and performance in every room where it goes unnamed. The difference between a talent gap and a capacity gap is everything, and most organizations are solving for the wrong one. In the next episode, we're going to go deeper into one of the consequences, the decision debt. And what happens when invisible load doesn't just slow decisions down, it starts compounding them. The cost of what you haven't decided yet. Around here, we return to three anchors: how we navigate our emotions, how we adapt across differences, and how we steady ourselves when stress shows up. Because that's what helps us stay human when life gets real. Thank you for being here. You don't have to carry the weight alone, and you don't have to pretend that it isn't there. And remember, I am brave, I am enough, I am brave enough, and so are you. This is Adaptive Humans, real talk, intentional growth.